Good morning. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Mitch Ricketts today. He is a professor of agricultural safety and health at K-State, where he teaches courses, conducts extension activities, and carries out research in agricultural and occupational injury prevention. He's a board-certified safety professional with over 30 years' experience in safety, health, and environmental management. Over the years, Dr. Ricketts has worked in diverse settings such as agriculture, manufacturing, chemical and biological laboratories, and school safety.
Just a few more of these. Yeah, all right. Well, good morning. It's great to see everyone today. I hope everybody's having a good Friday. Is this the night that K-State has a really late ball game? We all have to stay up. Is that tonight? Tomorrow night. Okay. All right. So, okay. Well, again, it's great to see everybody here. My name is Mitch Ricketts. And I was asked to visit some about hazards that we might encounter in the field when we're collecting field samples. And I've always felt like one of the most enjoyable aspects of research is getting out into the field, making observation samples, things like that. And if we're fortunate enough to get to do that in agricultural areas, there are certain things that we need to kind of be on the lookout and recognize so that we can avoid certain hazards. And we are going to discuss some of those today. I believe that we learn best when we are actively engaged in learning. So we're going to be discussing some scenarios, and we do have people on Zoom. Is that correct? All right. So for those in the room, you've got handouts that have the scenarios on them. And for those on Zoom, I've got some slides that show the problems that we'll be considering. So let's go ahead and consider our first issue. If I can figure out how to make the slides move. I may need, I guess I'm too old here.
I see it's coming down.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's what I'd like to use. Yes, those things. Okay, great. Great. All right. So this is our first case. So those of you who have the handouts, I would like you to, and let's turn the volume. Those of you who have the handouts, let me ask you guys this. Are you guys willing to get up and move? If I asked you to get together in groups of 2 to 3, would you do that? Let's go ahead and do that. Let's get together in groups of 2 to 3. Okay. And those on Zoom, you have to do it by yourself, I guess, unless you have a room full of people. Okay, let's consider this first problem here. And the reason I want you in groups is I want you guys to discuss this among yourselves, and then we'll talk about it as a big group. So let's look at this first problem here. Here's the problem. You are studying pathogens on dairy farms. You've arrived at the farm and you see a yellow-brown fog around some big, freshly filled bags of silage. So you got 3 questions here. I'll move the slide so the folks on Zoom can see the questions. Remember, you're out doing research on a dairy farm, looking for pathogens out there, studying them. So you see this yellow-brown fog. What is the fog? And whether you know what it is or not, the next two questions are still very important. What safety issues do you need to consider? And do you walk in or near the fog to get to your destination? So I'd like you guys to just take a minute. I'm not going to give you very long, but I want you to take a minute and discuss those three questions among yourselves. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us what you came up with.
join us. You need to answer.
Okay, quick decision making. I'll give you 30 more seconds. All right, I'm going to interrupt you now. I know that not everyone is finished. Some people have finished, some have just started, but we're going to interrupt you now. So, who's got any ideas on what this fog is here? Yes, sir.
I was doing over that. I bring up back here.
Okay, some type of a gas, and did you say a sulfuric type gas? And from the breakdown of the silage, from some bacterial actions or things like that? Okay. Other ideas?
Maybe it's fungus.
A fungus, that's an interesting thing. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what it is in a few minutes, but I'm not for sure what it is in a few minutes. Any other ideas? Okay, the next question here.
Someone had a drought.
Somebody,
Usually that's associated with a drought, I think.
very often that is associated with drought. It tends to occur when we get a lot of nitrogen concentrated in that corn, that chopped up corn that's in that bag. Yeah. Next question, and we're not going to say for sure what this is until we go through the next two, because when you're out in the field, you may not know. 2, what safety issues do you need to consider? What do you guys think? Breathing it. Does that look like something that would be pretty good to breathe? It might not be, yeah. Okay, precautions. We're going to take any precautions here. Are we going to walk through it? All right. I will tell you this. I was 50 yards away from it. This is some video I took about 10 or 12 years ago. And I was 50 yards away from it. I had an air monitor with me and I was okay where I was. But where I was with my air monitor, and I'll show you what this gas was. With my air monitor reading 0 on this particular gas, I could still smell a faint bleach smell. A smell kind of like when you go to a swimming pool and you smell that bleach in the air. That's about the way it smelled even when it was registering 0 on my monitor.
Just did that, like, that in there, silence bag.
Yes, you can. You can. All right. So let's consider what this is. Okay. So it is that the brownish part of it is nitrogen dioxide. It's an oxide of nitrogen. Yellowish parts are either diluted nitrogen dioxide or they are nitrogen tetraoxide. Both of these are highly corrosive gases. If you breathe those into your lungs, they don't have the warning properties that things like chlorine have. With chlorine, if you breathe that, it reacts immediately with the moist mucous membranes in the upper respiratory system, and immediately you've been exposed to something bad and you get out of there. Nitrogen dioxide does not do that to everyone. With a lot of people, especially those who've been around it a lot, can take a few breaths of this without getting knocked down. And if you do take a few breaths of this, what can happen then? You get that nitrogen, you get these oxides of nitrogen in your lungs down deep in the tissues, and they react over time with the moisture down in the deep tissues of your lungs to create nitric acid. And nitric acid is not a good thing to have in the lungs. And so it's very corrosive. And what tends to happen to folks who get a few good breaths of this is that in the middle of the night, they're usually sleeping about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They wake up just almost unable to breathe. It's like there's an elephant on their chest, and they go to the hospital, and the hospital can sometimes save them and the hospital can sometimes not. So what you're looking at right here, if you walked into that and took a few deep breaths, that could kill you. Yes. Okay, let's consider that. All right. So here we go. This is at the same time, I took some videos of them making the silage. So here we are out in a cornfield and they are chopping up this green corn. And in this case, it had been a very dry summer. But it had started raining right before harvest and it had been raining the night before. You can see it's kind of misty in the air. So there's that silage there is very wet, even though there's been a drought going on. But because there was a drought, there's a lot of nitrogen packed into there. And here's what that chopped up plant material looks like. And they just chop up the whole corn. That's what it looks like right there. So they're out in the field here and let's make sure I'm on the slide. I think I'm on. I don't think I moved ahead. I think that's the same. Here we go. So we're out in the field loading that chopped up corn material into this big truck. And that truck is going to come back around to the area where then this material gets packed into the bags and we'll see them doing that. And for those of you who are interested in safety, and I assume you are, or you wouldn't be here, I want you to also think about the hazards of what would happen. Look at these augers here. Let me turn down the sound. Here we go. So we're going to back up. It's called a silage bagger. We're going to dump it into there. We got these augers in there going, so that's not a good place to be playing around in there. You get caught in that. And I think good will happen there. And this bagger now is packing that silage into these bags. And he's not actually driving forward. Can you see that he's moving forward? He's not actually driving forward. He's packing the silage into the bags and that pushes that bagger forward. So it's being packed in there really tight. And these folks who do the bagging, they have to be very careful. They don't want to leave too much moisture in the corn. They don't want to take too much out. So they're always watching how much of the liquid is coming out of the bag while they're doing this. So these bags can be very long. Some of them are short. There's some of them that are not much bigger than a big brown bale of hay. But others are very long. These things can be 500 feet. They can be even more than that. These here were like a couple of 100 feet long. When they get this packed in, then they seal off the end of it, the open end of it. In this case, they use a skid loader and dump some dirt on there. There's a port right here. And in this case, this bag was loaded. I can't remember if it was just loaded and so nothing's coming out of it yet, or if it had been loaded a few days before and it's done. But here's a port. They put these on the bags to allow gases to come out, because as the bacteria in there are going to break down the nitrogen in the plant material, and it is going to get combined with oxygen. And it is going to create oxides of nitrogen. And you're going to have all kinds of oxides of nitrogen in there, including some that are not corrosive, and then the ones that we looked at that are very corrosive. Does that answer the question of where the gas comes from? Okay, it's bacterial action breaking down that plant material and essentially combining nitrogen with oxygen. That's not where I wanted to go. Here we go. Now, it used to be, back when I was a kid, they put it all in these big tower silos. And they used to tell us, I remember as a kid going out there after they'd packed these things, and it was really cool because the water around the moisture would drain out of these because that silage was wet and it'd be all bubbling out there. And folks would run out of the house and say, "You kids get away from there. Something bad's going to happen to you." And that just made us want to go back and look more. But sometimes on these, there's still a few in use. Sometimes you might see that cloud of gas up here around the top. With these upright tower silos like this that are not oxygen limiting, that nitrogen dioxide is usually produced 2 or 3 days after it's been packed in here. With those bags, it's produced about 8 hours. It starts producing about 8 hours. With these big tower silos, the production of it will last for several days in those bags. It uses up the oxygen pretty quickly in those bags. And so with those bags, they'll only produce that gas for a day or so. And then we have some others, these blue ones. What are these blue ones called here? Anybody know what these do? Those are oxygen limiting silos. These we always have to be careful about. And again, these are not used much anymore. It's mostly the bags. But these oxygen limiting silos, you'll still see these. And did you guys know that 2 K-State employees were killed in one of these in the 1980s at the Ag Research Center out at Garden City, Kansas? When they entered, there was actually no silage in the bed, just a little bit of debris at the very bottom of the silo. But this is fiberglass, fused fiberglass. There are breather bags in the top, but it's designed to make this an oxygen deficient environment. And we had one employee entered, he collapsed. Another employee ran in to get him, collapsed. And at that point, the third employee who saw them in there, they went in and they called the sheriff's office. But that was in the 1980s out at Garden City. So these things are just never safe to enter unless you've got air monitoring equipment. You may also see silage in these bunker silos. And sometimes they have concrete structures around them like that. Sometimes they're just holes or trenches in the ground. And when they put this, they'll put the silage in there, and then they'll put this plastic on top to try and keep as much oxygen out as possible. And you may see a yellow fog around these too. So these things we've got to be very careful about, and I want to show you here what the air monitoring. So, okay, so this one at the time, well, we won't go into that, but we'll just say this is the bag. This is the bagger. And overnight, they had a traveling crew. It's kind of like weed harvest. There are traveling crews that go around and do this because most farmers don't have this equipment. And at the end of the evening, this bag was not full. And so to save some money, they left the bagger attached to the front end. And this is some video that I took around that bagger. And the lighting in here is not great. Can you guys see a yellowish haze around that? Yeah, right there. Okay. I had an air monitoring device set up on here. And I'm gonna go around and show you what that air monitoring device told us. This is here's the air monitoring device right here. And in just a second, it will get to where we can see the screen of it. And again, I'm back quite a ways using my telephoto lens there with another air monitor next to me. This thing is alarming because it's not happy about what it's reading. I'm gonna stop this right here. So this is reading 5 different gases. Combustible gases, that would be things like methane, and we're not getting any of that here. It's a 0. We're getting carbon monoxide a little bit, 20. That's probably not enough. Oh, that's helpful. That's probably not enough to kill you, but that's enough to give you a good headache and maybe make you nauseated. Oxygen is okay, 20.8% oxygen. That's normal. We're not getting any hydrogen sulfide, but here's what we're getting: nitrogen dioxide. And if you guys have gas monitors, this is an extra sensor you have to buy specially for nitrogen dioxide. And this thing, we don't know what the actual concentration is here because this monitor is set only to monitor up to the IDLH. So those of you who are in safety, what does IDLH mean?
Immediately dangerous to life.
There you go, immediately dangerous to life and health. And for nitrogen dioxide, that's 20 parts per million. This monitor doesn't go up above that. So we don't know what the actual concentration is other than it's at least 20 parts per million, which can kill you. Okay. And that is here around, that's really an annoying sound. So let me get that off of there. I move it forward, but that is here. And there you can see if somebody's going to get into that bagger, they'd have to go up there. And this was at a location where I had safety responsibilities. So I had the unenviable job of holding up all of the work until the levels were safe, because nobody could get into this bagger. So do we walk through that cloud of gas? Everybody says no. Okay. And that's most gases we can't see. These are very unusual gases in that we can see them. In most gases, we can't see them all. Can you guys think of other locations out in agricultural areas where we have to be very careful about the air that we breathe, either because of asphyxiating gases or because of limited oxygen? Can you guys think of other places? Anhydrous ammonia, that's a nasty one, and that can burn the skin. And also, if you take a deep breath of that immediately reacts with the upper airways. And sometimes people, well, that can just be very, very bad. Yeah. Yeah. Anhydrous. So besides anhydrous, can you think of any others? Okay. Well, let's consider, oops, going the wrong way. Here we go. Let's consider confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. And in particular, let's consider swine facilities. And very often inside these will have slatted floors. The pigs are up on the slats and the waste drains down. And there are usually going to be tanks somewhere that are collecting the manure and the urine and all of that. And these produce a lot of sewer gases. And some of these are underground pits like this one. And here you see a ventilator on top. And some of them are open pits like this one right here. These will produce just about any type of sewer gas you can imagine. There's going to be a lot of carbon monoxide, and there's going to be a lot of hydrogen sulfide. And when this is most hazardous is when they pump these pits out, they agitate the manure. They want to get the solids suspended. And when they do that, these produce tremendous amounts of ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon monoxide. And at those times, those are good times to not be out collecting samples. You know, those are good times for the fewest people to be there as possible. Yeah.
Also.
You know, there are all kinds of nasty bacteria in there, and many bacteria that you find in swine facilities are zoonotic. And so absolutely, typically when you go into a swine unit, you're going to go in, they're going to make you strip off all your clothes. They don't want you bringing in any diseases because the pigs can catch them from you. They're going to make you strip off all your clothes, go through showers, put on their coveralls and their boots. And you go in and do your stuff, and it's important not to be wiping your face or touching your mouth or anything like that while you're in there. If you get bit or anything like that, it's very important to go see a doctor. Many people who work around pigs test positive for hepatitis E. That is a zoonotic disease that pigs can pass on to humans. There's all kinds of bacteria in there that can make you very ill. And when you leave, you exit the same way that you came in. You take off the coveralls, you go through a shower, you put your clothes back on. And those of you who've done this before probably know that you have to go home after that and shampoo your hair about 15 times. It's just really hard to get all of that off. You smell bad for a long time. Yeah. So anyway, if there's agitation going on here, if they're pumping these out, that's just not a good time to be there. Typically, when that's happening, they'll use tunnel ventilation. They'll have on one side, they'll have all of the intake vents open, and on the other side of the unit, they'll have all of the exhaust vents going, and you'll get a wind going through here. And if you don't do that, it'll kill the pigs. Okay, that's how much that stuff is in there.
Where they have those great.
Yes, and I will tell you this, folks, long-term, people who work long-term in swine confinement units typically do have a number of respiratory problems. There's chronic exposure. The ones that I've been in and have measured ammonia, it's almost always at least 3 parts per million. Almost always ammonia is 3 parts per million. If you're breathing that every day for 20 to 40 years, you're going to have some lung damage. There are also a lot of agricultural deaths in there. You've got from the manure, from the feed, you've got all kinds of agricultural dust in the air. So it's a tough environment, very corrosive. If you go out to these because of the ammonia in the air, look around at any exposed metal. It'll almost always be rusted. Electrical fixtures have to be replaced all the time because it's such a highly corrosive environment. So there's a chronic exposure, and then when they are agitating the manure, there's an acute exposure. So you got to be really careful at those times. Yeah. Another thing to think about in terms of really nasty places where you don't want to go because of the air, we do have a lot of irrigation wells, irrigation pumping stations. And these, if we do this again next year, I'll show you some air monitoring from this one. But this is what the well looks like with the cover down, with the cover open. That's what it looks like inside. And in this one right here, snake. Sorry?
That black snake that's in there.
Yeah, the black snake and the black-widow spiders and all those. Yeah. Actually, they would die in this one. Okay. This one here, oxygen in this one is very, very low. I can't remember for sure. I'm thinking it was 14% or something like that. So it should be close to 21%, and there's not much oxygen in there. The interesting thing was when I did air monitoring in this, I did not find any. I didn't. My 5-gas monitor would not register any other gases. It did not register methane or carbon monoxide, ones that we might expect, or hydrogen sulfide. So I don't know why the oxygen was low in here. My guess is either carbon dioxide, which my monitor didn't measure, or water vapor, one of those two, because the water in here, when the pump is on, it's being stirred up here. And both of those can exclude oxygen from the area. Okay. So those are some things we want to think about in terms of the air that we're breathing. And these, okay, Joe, before anybody goes into one of these spaces we've been showing, what do they need to do to comply with K-State environmental health and safety requirements?
First of all, we're going to need a space meter and a permit to enter. So we know that it is a non-permitted space. Until then, we need the first 2 items, bed and meter.
Okay, so we don't go into any of these things without contacting environmental health and safety, and then they are going to take care of us. And hopefully we're going to decide that we can wait, that maybe we don't really need to get in here. Maybe there's other ways of getting our samples. You know, perhaps we wanted to take some samples from those waste pits, from those manure pits.
We do have a meter calibrated, ready for use, and you don't need to know a number. In an emergency, even just call police and they'll get us dispatch.
Okay, emergency, call 911. All right. But if you need to take samples in one of these areas, this is where we want probably some kind of a long-handled sample probe. And we ought to be very careful when we open the hatches on these things. Sometimes gases rush out, and sometimes they affect a person immediately and the person falls in. So even when we're opening the hatches, we want to have called environmental health and safety and have some help before we do that with any of these things. But there are some cool bacteria inside some of these places, and there'd be some interesting things to look at, not just bacteria, but fungi and some other things, protozoans, all kinds of things. Okay, let's think now about the next problem that you have. So on your sheet, you have got field safety problem number 2, cattle. These are 2 different pastures. I don't want you to think that these animals are all in the same pastures. You can imagine, it's up to your own imagination which pasture you're going to enter. But here's your problem. You're studying zoonotic pathogens in small waterways. A beef farmer has agreed to let you conduct research on her property. When you arrive, the farmer is not there, but she left a note on the gate saying you can go into the pasture to do your research. She just wants you to keep the gates closed because there are cattle in the pasture. So, two questions here for your own safety. What behavioral signals should you be alert for in the animals? And what precautions will you consider during your time in the pasture? So in your small groups, I want you to discuss those two things. What kind of behaviors in these animals might be a warning to you? And going in, what precautions you're going to take to make sure you can stay safe. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. And those who came in a little later, I'd encourage you to get up and get with a group so that you can have somebody to talk to, but it's up to you. I won't force you.
That's okay. No.
All right, are we ready? Let's go ahead and consider question number one. What are some signs that cattle may want you to back off? What might they do? Tell me some things. Any thoughts? Okay, what do their ears do? Their ears will often, they will become very alert. Yeah, their ears are usually pretty erect when they're getting agitated. What else we can look at? What might they do with their feet? Paw the ground, throw up some dirt. Yeah. What do those big bulls do when they come up and get sideways of you? What do they do with their backs? They kind of arch up their backs and put their heads down. What about noises? What sorts of noises do these critters make when they're agitated? Snorts, bellows. There's kind of a growling noise, and that growling noise is one that they're pretty serious when they make that growling noise usually. Okay. Well, let's any others you guys can think of.
They rub their head.
Rubbing their heads on the ground or on a tree or on something like that. That's a sign. Yeah. Okay. All right. Does that cow look very happy? This picture was taken by Ken Coffey, who was a researcher. He worked at the Agriculture Experiment Station in Southeast Kansas, and I believe he took this picture in Mound Valley. And do you know why this cow is so agitated? Can you see why she's so agitated? Brand new calf. That the time right before and right after calving, you got to be really careful around these cows. And what this cow did here right after this, while he was standing back a ways with the telephone lens, but anyway, she rammed the gate. And occasionally when they ram a gate, sometimes something can break on the gate. And one of the most common ways people get killed in close confined areas with cattle is when the animal hits a gate, it swings out and hits a person either in the chest or the head. So we don't want to be standing right next to a gate when an animal's doing something like this. Okay, let's see here. What have we missed? The second one, I don't think we talked about that. The bobbing and shaking the head, kind of dancing around with tail flicking. Normally, you don't see on a lot of cattle, you don't see the whites of their eyeballs, but sometimes when they get really angry, their eyes kind of protrude and you'll see a white ring around the eye. Sometimes the back will go up. This arched back, lowering the head. And sometimes it's a really bad sign if they're turned sideways. They put that head down and then they don't turn their body, but they turn their neck and look at you. And if they straighten up and turn their body towards you right after that, that's a good time to, oh, we forgot to talk about the number 2 back here. Let's go back here. What precautions are you going to take? What do we want to do here? Yeah.
Or shade trees or whatever.
Okay. Okay. You're not going to sneak up on them. You're going to let them know, hey, I'm here. I'm here. Yeah. Don't crowd the animals. You get up within about 20 feet of an animal and that's asking for trouble there. Yeah. What else?
Don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. These calves are old enough here in this picture, we might be okay, but if it's still, let's just not get in between the cows and their calves. Yeah, especially when they're young, we want to just stay away from them. We have to think about whether they've been agitated by coyotes or other critters before. Okay. All right. Tell me what's the best way to get across this field here? If you're thinking about the cattle. Okay, if you circle around and so you're circle around so you can stay close to fences if you're walking, okay? Is walking the best way to go out here? Pickup's pretty good to have. Yeah, yeah. Pickup's a good thing and not get too far away from pickup. Most of us can jump into a pickup faster than we can scramble over a fence. But if you're good at scrambling over fences, you want to stay close to those. All right. So let's look at some examples here. I did not take these videos. I stole these off of the internet. This first one's a little shaky, but it stabilizes. And this bull right here is just doing this classic broadside display with the arch back, the lower head. And another thing we didn't mention, sometimes there's just a lot, when they're really agitated, sometimes there's just a lot of saliva and mucus coming out. They can, it just looks, they just nasty looking emissions from the mouth there. So. And don't walk up and photograph these like this guy's doing. His broadside showing his size, back arched, head down. Look at the stuff coming out of his mouth and nose. That's just a classic pose right there of leave me alone. It's kind of that growling noise. Not good. This person was behind fence. I edited and moved out somewhere he was far away. He's behind fence. And this one did end up walking off, but when it turns towards you like that, now this is a cow, that's not a bull. And look at all the signs, almost every sign on that list before you. He's the head bobbing, the shaking, the tail flicking, the pawing, rubbing the head on the ground. You get that is not a good cow to get into the pen with right there. There was a lot of noise. I cut the sound on this one because the guy was talking. But that cow is making a lot of noise. But if you see that, it's time to back slowly towards the pickup. You hear that kind of a growling sound. That's not a friendly sound. And I cut the video off there because it just gets louder and louder. And then this bull goes over and there's a pile of logs and he gets his head and he starts knocking the logs around. So, you know, those are some signs that we probably overstayed our welcome here. What about running? Is running a good thing to do around these critters? That tends to just trigger them to charge. Now, if one is already running after you, you may not have much choice but to run for the fence or run for the pickup. But if you can back away slowly, that's certainly a better way of doing it. How many are comfortable working around cattle? Okay. Those who are probably go in and do this okay. If you're not comfortable working around cattle, you want to have an experienced person with you. It's just don't go in just trusting that everything is going to be okay. We do have a number of people get killed by cattle each year. And one of the signs of aggression is when you're laying on their back and they're stomping on your chest. That's one of the definite signs of aggression there. All right. Just so you know, cattle, there's been a lot of studies done on injuries that happen to livestock workers. This is from a study which several of us did in the College of Agriculture a few years ago. And the kinds of ways that animals do get, or that people do get hurt in working with cattle, these are the most common. Aggressively charging a person, that's usually at specific times. Typically when we're breeding cattle, when cattle are calving right before and right after, or when we just have an animal that's just known to be mean, like some of those that we saw the pictures of. Usually this happens in confined areas, but it does occur sometimes out in the open. That's why you want to have that pickup there, be close to the fence. A lot of them are animals that are not clearly aggressive. You know, the animal's frightened and it's moving quickly, and they're big enough that if they bump up, if they can crush you against something without any intention of doing so, without being aggressive. They're just big animals. So we don't get between the animals and fixed structures. It's just not a good place to be. Anything else we ought to talk about with being out in the field with livestock?
In this, but are the animals who behave this way more like they behave this way if they have been routinely like handled? Or every animal like?
That is a tough question. What do you guys say?
Treat every animal as the dangers you just saw there. You never know when, where, or why.
And sometimes animals that have been bottle fed, like bulls, they think they're people. And whether they're trying to hurt you or not, they're big enough that if they knock you down, you know, it's not a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. Other tips. Best thing to do is be out there and pick up. Best thing is to have the owner of the animals with you. And if you can be out there and pick up, that's great. Always have an escape route. And if you see those signs of aggression, you need to leave. That's just not a good time to be out there. All right. What time do we need to quit so that folks can get to their next one?
Only one track.
Oh, okay. So we can stay till like 3 o'clock. No, I won't do that to you. Okay. Yeah. So, all right. Well, the schedule says I'm on here until 11, so I'll make sure I don't keep you even 1 minute past 11. How about that? All right. Let's look at the next safety problem. Field safety problem number 3. Here's your problem. You're studying conditions that promote the growth of fungi that produce mycotoxins in stored grain. You believe, what are mycotoxins? What are those? You guys are bashful. These are poisons produced by fungi. Yeah. Okay. Well, it just says there, fungi. All right. Some of these, sometimes they call a group of these vomitoxins, which tells you what they do if they're in the food that you eat. You believe conditions this year will be favorable for aspergillus to produce lots of aflatoxins. You and your colleague drive 3 hours to a research farm with the hope of sampling corn from a bin. Upon arriving, you find that your extendable grain sampling probe was accidentally left back at the main campus. You really want these samples. You and your colleague discuss climbing in so that you can collect samples by hand. And so you've got 2 questions. What safety issues do you need to consider? And do you decide to enter the bin or not? Explain. So you guys talk about this for a couple of minutes. Was this a pretty easy one? All right, let's consider these questions here. What are the safety issues? What can happen if we climb in?
Physical.
Find space.
Confined space, falling. You know, most the most common way people get killed on grain bins is falling. Okay, so that's one thing. All right, and then we've got what? A confined space.
Well, grain,
The grain, we'd be very concerned about that moving grain. And while I'm talking, this was, I went up to the top of this one. I was out there with research staff and we opened the hatch here and I took some video of the grain inside. And while I'm talking here, is the lighting good enough? You can see what's happening there? Okay, all right, that's what's going on inside. And that doesn't happen all the time, but it happens sometimes. And if we are standing there, what will that do? That will pull us under, and none of us are strong enough to avoid that. Researchers have done many studies on this, typically with mannequins, because it's hard to do it with people because it's dangerous. But if you get up to your knees, most people are not strong enough to pull themselves out, even if they have something to hold on to. In fact, most people are not strong enough to hold them. If let's say that you've laid a ladder or something across the top and you've grabbed the sides of that ladder and it starts pulling you under, if it gets up to your knees, very few people are strong enough to hold onto that ladder and keep themselves from being dragged under. Okay. So this is a very serious thing. It does kill a number of people every year. Let's go back up to this question here. Do you decide to enter the bin or not? How many say yes, I'll go in? No takers. Everybody says no. All right. Even if it's 3 hours to go back to get that sampling probe, we got to do that. All right. So just some ways this happens. Let's I don't know why this thing is up here. Is there a way to move that? Oh well, it's not that big a deal. Okay. So anyway, if we're standing up there and that grain starts to move, what it does is it sucks us under. And if you get up even, up to your chest, let's say you get up to your chest and your feet hit the bottom. Still, every time you inhale, or, every time you exhale, your chest gets smaller. And then to inhale, you have to push the grain back out. And that's just pretty hard to do. So people will suffocate in there. Also, we have this thing where if we are in this upright position and we can't move, blood may tend to pool in our legs and we can pass out. Things like that can happen. You get drawn under the grain. Typically what happens when they do autopsies on folks who have been drawn under the grain, there's usually grain in the airways. But anyway, this is, we just don't go in if there's grain in the bin. And let's look at a couple of ways that the grain can start moving here. One way, most of these bins are going to have a way to I think they're all going to have a way to unload the grain from the bottom. In some cases, you've got a fixed auger that's down there that's going to transport that grain out. If we go back up to this one, this bin right here had an auger in the center, and then it delivered the grain up here and out that spout, and then they would mix out here. They'd have a truckload with say silage, and they put the corn in it and make their feed there. But one way the grain can start moving, and this is when you saw it moving in that video before, it was moving because they were unloading the silo. Or the bin, I'm sorry. But one way grain can start moving is if we start unloading it from the bottom, and it will just kind of suck things down. That's a little stylized. That vortex is not quite that pretty, but anyway, it'll do that. And so if we have a person in there when that happens, typically when this does happen, there's usually not enough time to get emergency responders there before the person is dead. And you guys know how do they typically get a person out of here? What do they do to the side of the bin here? They cut the side of the bin open, and because it's just about impossible to find somebody in there. Yes.
When I was a kid, they used to send their kids up and put the grade down.
Yeah.
And they still do that.
We try to discourage that, but unfortunately some people do, and people get killed every year doing that. Yeah. Yeah. Sadly. That's one way people get sucked under, is when we're moving the grain. And what's happening here? What's happened here? So we got some kind of a void in here. And there are various ways that these voids can occur. But even when the grain is not actively being unloaded, you've still got a risk. If you get in, you don't know there's a void down here. You can't see it. We've got a cutaway version or view there, so you can. There's a lot of ways that can happen, but one way it can happen, let's say we've got a bin that's been partially unloaded. And let's say that this grain down here that's been unloaded, it's good and dry, and it's flowed pretty well. And then we add some new grain to it. And let's say that new grain has got a lot of moisture in it. And maybe it gets moldy and out of condition and it sticks together. And then we go ahead sometime later and we start unloading the bin again. And what can happen is that good dry grain underneath can flow, but maybe that top is crusted over and it doesn't. And then we can end up with a void, and that can collapse at any time. And sometimes if enough grain has been emptied, we may be able to enter the bin from a door down here on bottom. And still we don't do that if grain is in there, especially if it's stuck to the sides, because without warning that can come down. Here's another thing that farmers try to do is you get this grain bit bridged up here on top. Some of you have done this, right? Now, anyway, you go in there with the pole and you start poking on this to try and get it to move. And people get killed doing that every year as well. So there are other hazards in these bins as well. So what other hazards can you guys think of in these grain bins besides the flowing grain? What else can you think of? Grain dust, especially if you're in there shoveling things out. One episode, a really dusty grain can give you a flu-like episode called organic dust toxic syndrome, or ODTS, due to the microorganisms. A lot of that, if you do that a lot, then much worse and permanent conditions can occur. Yeah. Let's consider some other things here. Those of you who've worked around grain bins, do those canisters look familiar at all? What about any of this right here? Anybody ever been around fumigants used in grain bins before? These are little pellets inside of here, and you open the container and you put some pellets in the bin. And this is aluminum phosphide. It's usually sold under the brand name Toxin. We got, I promise you we'll be done here in 3 minutes. Toxin, and that stuff right there will react. The aluminum phosphide reacts with moisture in the air, creates phosphine gas, and phosphine gas is very corrosive to the lungs. This is another one where if you breathe it, it may not immediately knock you down, but later that night, you're going to wake up not being able to breathe. You go to the hospital, and maybe they can save you, maybe they can't. So we want to know before we go into any bin, we've got to talk with the owners. Have any fumigants been used? And if they have, has the bin been aerated and has the air been checked before we even open the hatch? Okay, because this can come out at you, just when you open the hatch. Okay, another thing, I mentioned that on the bottoms of grain bins, we usually have some augers or other devices. This one is embedded in the floor. Sometimes there'll be an auger that's more exposed than that. Some of them will sweep around the room. But with any of these, if you get a body part or your clothing or anything caught in there when it runs, it's going to bring that down. It's it's going to tear you up. It's going to pull you apart partially and probably amputate some. Okay, so electricity. There's usually electrical devices in there, so we got to make sure that we've got the electricity locked out before we go in, because farms are notorious for having exposed wires and electrical wiring that's done by somebody who maybe wasn't a licensed electrician. So do we go into the bin? We don't do that. If you have to go into a bin, you get to call Joe's office, all right, Environmental Health and Safety, and they're going to work with you on that. We had one more problem, and we have 1 minute according to my watch. So instead of doing the problem, we're just going to say, if you see that sign, you don't go in, all right? If you see that sign out in a field, in a greenhouse, a unit, a growth chamber, a research plot, anything like that, it means pesticides have been applied. We're in a period of time called a restricted entry interval. And during that time, if you go in and you do not have the proper training and the proper personal protective equipment, it's not only a violation of the law, but you can also be hurt. If we do this again next year, maybe we'll do that problem there, but we won't have time for it this time. 30 seconds. Any questions? All right, let's go eat some lunch.